insurrection of the KKK in the Confederate militia coup against the United States by insurgent espionage terrorism has conducted many very extreme estimates, such as the Looking Ground program and other secret estimations of the strategies to overthrow the United States in a pseudo bloodless coup, which is the prerequisite to the generation of their extreme genocides. And their targeting of David Bowles has ran the numbers under the various estimates, such as his original training concerning his position of being hypermasculine to a non-supportive version of their goal. It includes their estimates on his discipline as a subordinate aspect of masculinity by extreme training, at which point you have the extreme training with the martial arts exchanges from an early age, and the hyperacceleration of the martial arts training and discipline includes the position of the excessive situations as a credible threat in preparation before the war, as David would be in a position as general where he would be subject to many conflicts of physical danger, at which point the earliest they could get him in is necessary to national security, at which point these training mechanisms would have put him on a martial arts ranking of an extreme top tier level, well before his ascension into adulthood or into an adult variant of the body, as small children haven't grown into their bodies yet, at which point the position of the training, having been hyper accelerated, would have made most of the competitions against those who had grown up. So when David would have been 12, he would have had competitions with 18-year-olds who would have had similar or excessive training beyond that, at which point his training includes the competitions of competing at his level, and competing at his level with people who are more capable or have better assets at that position ingrains the additional humility upon discipline of knowing when you are competing at your own level, then you are not going to have the advantage that you would be used to, because it's not a series of wins so much as it is a competition of assets, and the competition of assets at their levels is equal, and equal with better reinforcements is going to win every time. And this, as an essential aspect of the engagement of those training mechanisms, means that all of those training competitions he would have gone to, he would have directly lost, as it would have been physically impossible as an aspect of the mental fortitude of the extreme situations, at which point, all ranks being equal, it's a question of exhaustion. Strikes being equal, it's a question of the subordinate resources, and thus the additional strengths and the additional speeds would have given them the inherent advantage, at which point it's a question of how quickly David would have been exhausted in the state for those competitions, which would have already been an active aspect of his normal training beyond public or more professional competitions, asserting these prerequisite mentalities in his ability to rate the enemy before engaging in any conflict, which this would have to have been normalized before he would have upgraded into any in-field combat, even if he's being supplemented by technology such as his ability to engage in command or his use of higher technology arsenals such as warplanes, at which point the engagement having been normalized allows for more accurate ratings of combats, for strategizing the engagements, At which point, these types of assessments make it difficult for the insurrectionists and the jealous bureaucrats to have been able to fund through the Phantom Cells a correct timed resource against David in the field, at which point, when they would have sent him to fight in the field directly, they, having supported the enemy, would have generated their ability to assert these abilities to kill him in war, at which point their backing of the enemy under the specific orders of targeting David's character would have gone against the more disciplined, more trained, more refined person who used to being outdone by those types of situations, would be more equipped and less prone to an arrogant mistake. The threat from these insurrections is derived by the Ku Klux Klan, which, having acted as an insurgency, dons the robes in private and goes back to normal clothes once they've redigested themselves into public functions, such as your senators, such as your judges, such as your police officers, such as your store clerks, etc. They are normal members of society. They are just a secret police organization derived by a militia. They are a militia-formed terrorist organization which generates their ability to engage in the various threats. Now, those threats, having correctly assessed David's character, have every confidence in the things that they have calculated as unrevocably true, and thus creating the problem with conducting any of the strategic advantages of the lawful market price or obligations. At which point they, being terrorist militia, do not have a problem with the rejection of law and the market price, as they are lawless anarchists loyal to wizard communism for the central planning of the United States economy, and others for the ascension of their group against the host nation. And their normal damages have historically been validated.
The driver of this car was Mrs. Viola Liuzzo, mother of 5 children. 20 miles from Selma, Alabama on Route 80, a red and white sedan overtook her car. Several shots were fired. The driverless car veered off the highway and came to a stop at a cattle fence. Mrs. Liuzzo was dead. Arrested and charged with murder were 3 alleged members of the Ku Klux Klan. One was tried, and the jury was unable to reach a verdict. This is an earthen dam, the temporary grave of 3 civil rights workers, 2 white, 1 Negro, Mickey Schwerner, Andrew Goodman, and James Chaney, beaten and shot to death. Among those indicted for this triple slaying were 6 men identified as members of the Ku Klux Klan. None has been brought to trial. In this automobile, Reserve Lieutenant Colonel Lemuel Penn was killed by a shotgun blast while riding through Colbert, Georgia. Arrested for this crime were 4 Knights of the Ku Klux Klan. 2 Klansmen were tried and acquitted. In a few short months, 5 murders, 13 alleged members of the Ku Klux Klan said to be involved in the killings.
When such an order as this moves in and takes over the police power, you are completely at their mercy. And their atrocities and their violence can be visited on anybody that disagrees with them in any given situation.
What started as a joke 100 years ago, when a group of men donned bedsheets for a romp, has over the years attracted to it persons charged with acts of harassment, intimidation, and violence throughout the South. Even though the nation has been outraged for many years, the Ku Klux Klan persists with its bizarre ritual and trappings. But 100 years is a long time for a joke.
The engagement of the use of the grove, the Bohemian Grove, has many of those types of terrorist mentalities by the use of the religious function. They are willing to comply as auxiliary supports for the Satanist insurrection, which is engaging in these terrorist operations as they develop their terrorist cells in the manipulation of the general security of the society. and having their double agents actively involved in the government. You have at the highest level, for those who are able to access the Bohemian Grove ceremonies, the highest levels of government and power within this system, at which point you have the international affairs which do similar druid functions, such as the Germans and many of the others. At which point you have these systems which are inherent in the devotion of separating the United States from a Christian nation into a pagan nation, which is the generation through the overthrow of the leadership, which, applying the use of force from their power, normalizes the destabilizing of the organizations for the Christian systems, at which point the Christian systems being stable is problematic. Generating their ability to destroy them requires their compliance, and thus the permission on precedent in order to destroy the Christianity from society requires to compromise the leaders in their general congregations, and the compromising of their leaders and congregations generates the Ku Klux Klan type system, where many Klan members, being already religious church-going people, have merely the ability to infiltrate and overthrow, at which point do not be deceived by the fact that Lucifer comes as an angel of light, because he can and has always been an angel of light, at which point the fact that they're an infection should not deter from the realities of the danger of their Satanist foundations. At which point you have the corruption of the church and the various arrangements, which includes the normalizations of the policies in order to extort the church into compliance with the Satanist systems, such as the development of policies such as the permissions to extenuating terrorist operations, the permissions to abuses, the permissions to harassment, the permissions to terrorism, the permission to voter fraud. Now, the engagement of J-secular civil war overthrew California so that the Republic could no longer support the thing which was normally supported by many double agents in the higher judiciary system in the federal government, as their claim is that the military can do the things and the checks and balances don't apply to them, which generates the compliance to the larger threat, which consolidates inferior strategies to acquire systematic progress on policy, normalizing the terrorism and destabilizing or security of the general community. At which point, they, engaging in the terrorist operations at the top levels, get people scared away from their federal loyalties into the factions of local governments, at which point the taking over of local governments from the centralized federal government, which is from their second federal government in California under the Confederacy, which is a challenge to the American federal government, which is systematically being pieced apart and destroyed systematically, such as Congress's renouncing of its rights to legislation, as it doesn't read most of its policies and it actively isn't engaged in many of the policies, and their dereliction and rejection of their positions allows for the advancement of the corruption and the destruction of the system as it collapses into the more chaotic terrorist KKK Confederacy. Normalizing these systems includes the function of these terrorist operations, such as the replacement of the American Republic and its government being derived by the consent of the governed, systematically being destroyed by the voter fraud terrorisms, generates the complete replacement of American for Confederacy. at which point the erratic terrorists generating their arbitrary illegal wars and illegal prosecutions for slave raids generates the normalization of the lynch mob mentality society, as the pirate felon society from the Confederacy is derived by arbitrary terrorism, which would not be subverted by any particular order, which they having as a means of strategy the destruction through corruption. Their engagement of the normalization of corruption engages in the advantage of their progress as an espionage war strategy, as they are guilty of treason, sedition, and high crimes at the highest levels, generating the catastrophic threats to the international community as a virus infecting a cell goes in, gets reproduced exponentially, and the reproduction of the cell allows for the killing of the cell in favor of the reproduction using the cells. Factories generates, I think it was RNA, which generates the reproduction of the virus as the viruses collapse the cell, and the cell host being destroyed reproduced exponential quantities of the virus, which reproduced by the murder of the cell, which is happening with the Confederacy against the United States. And when the United States is reached its peak level of tolerance of the corruption, it would have completely been destroyed and replaced as irrelevant next to the Confederacy, which would no longer need it and would openly be able to acknowledge that they are Confederates and that America is dead and that it has no functional advantage. At which point, the murder hobo society generates their international military campaigns and otherwise considered illegal wars, and the war crimes being exponentially increased without the need of a fraudulent excuse to cover for their base nature generates the natural implying function. The implications generates the enforcements of their arbitrary terrorisms, destroying everything at the highest levels, at which point the study of historic magics around the world and terrorisms around the world and evils around the world would be generated for exponential injury to humankind, as the purpose would be the mass production of human suffering as its own service to itself, at which point you have the mass collapse of the human population into the 500 million, with the mass genocides in question, centralizing the entire human race into the preferred races until they're only themselves, and at that point their system will no longer have anything to feed on and would naturally have to collapse, at which point you have the systems of their self-destruction by their eradication, which is intellectually by structure a suicide bombing.
CBS Reports presents the Ku Klux Klan, the Invisible Empire. Here is CBS News correspondent Charles Kuralt. Good evening. The Ku Klux Klan is a secret organization which for 100 years has been allowed to exist in this country. Virtually every president of the United States in the past century has said the Klan has little regard for constituted authority. President Johnson, following the murder of Mrs. Liuzzo in Alabama, defined the Ku Klux Klan as a hooded society of bigots and warned Klansmen to get out of the Klan and return to a decent society before it is too late. After the president's warning, the House Un-American Activities Committee started a full-scale investigation of the Klan, and open hearings are scheduled for next month. The hearings will present witnesses, not only Klansmen, but also victims of Klan activity. However, the committee will not attempt to show the Klan in action. For the next hour, we will take a close look at the Ku Klux Klan from the inside out, examine its leadership, its ritual, its secret initiation, its record of violence. First, let us look at Klansmen without their robes. It is Sunday, the morning after a Ku Klux Klan meeting in Durham, North Carolina. These men are members of the United Klans of America, Knights of the Ku Klux Klan, one of the most exclusive organizations in America. It excludes many Protestants, all Roman Catholics, Jews, Negroes, Spanish Americans, Puerto Ricans, and anyone else who, according to the Ku Klux Klan, is not 100% pure American.
I don't hate niggers, man. I don't associate with niggers, but on the other hand, I don't associate with common white trash or Jews or Catholics if I can help it.
Right.
This is the Grand Dragon of the North Carolina realm of the United Klans, J. Robert Jones, former sailor, bricklayer, lightning rod salesman. He now reportedly rules over more than 50 claverns, or chapters, and their 7,000 dues-paying members.
I think the nigger has rights in this country. He should have equal rights, but separate rights. It's worked for 100 years in the South, and I think it will work now. But if you was the nicest fella in the world and Lyndon Johnson said I had to associate with you every day, I'd tell Lyndon Johnson to go straight to hell because I would not associate with you.
This is the Grand Consul, the late Matt Murphy, who until his recent death was chief legal counsel of the United Klans. His favorite targets were the Negroes, Jews, the Federal Reserve System, and international bankers.
I had made speeches before the United Klans of America, and they were the only organization that ever went on record after I had talked for 2 solid hours on the viciousness of the Federal Reserve Corporation and how it has built the taxpayers and American citizens out of all the money, and that Great Britain has removed the bank from the international bankers, and their bank is back under the crown.
Is Nighthawk?
This is a Nighthawk of the United Klans in North Carolina. A Nighthawk is responsible for the security of a clavern.
Why did you join the Klan?
Well, I've got a wife, 5 kids. I think that's enough reason. I want them to have a country to be raised up in like I was. I wasn't forced to go to school with niggers. I wasn't forced to eat with them. And I want them to have at least the right that I have.
The disarmament act.
This is Mr. Outlaw. Wherever Jones goes, Mr. Outlaw, the Grand Klexter or guard, is at his side. In the group are the 3 defendants indicted for the killing of Mrs. Liuzzo: Eugene Thomas, William Eaton, and Cully Leroy Wilkins. These men had little to say. They preferred listening to their counsel, Matt Murphy, Jr.
I read in my history books that the nigger man, the nigger race, was an inferior race. And that was a history that was taught me when I was in school. That hadn't been too long ago.
They always have been, they always will be.
Well, where do you think the money is coming from behind the civil rights movement?
From the Communist Party, from the Zionist Christ-killing Jews. And I say Christ-killing Jews because there have not been a flood since they crucified Christ, and their relatives can be traced back to the ones that's running the streets today.
What about the role of the Catholics in this, Mr. Jones?
The reason Catholic cannot get in this organization, his first allegiance is not to the United States of America. His first allegiance is to the Pope. They believe that the church should rule the government with the Pope at the head. And if they're right, there's a bunch of people in this country that are wrong. Let me say this. We have never had a drop of blood spilled between a white man and a black one in any town in North Carolina that we had the Klan organized. And we are doing our best to keep down trouble. But my people everybody in this country is organized with the exception of the white Protestant Gentiles. Your niggers have your Knights of your NAACP in court, along with your sorry white trash. You've got B'nai B'rith for your Jewish people. Your Knights of Columbus, which is a secret fraternal order, as they say, and nobody's ever talked about investigating that, which they should, in here. But the white Protestant Gentile, the only hope and the only salvation that they have left in this United States today is the United Klans of America Incorporated. We've saved the South twice, or the Klan has, and it looks like we're going to have to do it again.
One important Ku Klux Klan official was not at this meeting, the Klan Clud, or chaplain. But there was a Clud in action the night before.
You got a bunch of people standing right over here with the cameras and their news things. Half of them ain't got enough backbone to get them a job and go to work. But there might be some good ones in the crowd. I want to tell you, fellas, I'm just telling you, you fellas right over here, they'll print half of the story. They ain't got enough backbone to tell the truth, so anybody's a liar or the devil, you're going to die and go to hell without God. Fellas, I'm just telling you, you fellas right over here, they'll print half of the story. They ain't got enough backbone to tell the truth, so anybody's a liar or the devil, you're going to die and go to hell without God. If all you FBI FBI agent wanted to check the Klan and investigate them. I live on 209 Mendota Avenue, Lexington, North Carolina, and my name is Roy Woodle, and I'm not ashamed to be a Klansman. Amen.
Clud in action. The preacher, evangelist, the hellfire speaker, the rabble-rouser. He entertains with a mixture of comedy and Christianity. But above all, he preaches racial hatred.
Then do you think children is brought up to mix the black and white together? Do you know your horse won't mix with your cow, your dog won't mix with your hog, and you tell me white people has got a mind and can't think no clearer than that? Listen, friend, we need to turn to God. We need to wake up to God. We had forefathers die to give us freedom. Our forefathers walked barefooted in the snow and fought and died to give us freedom. And now here we sit back because we got a dictator in the White House, a dictating, and you sitting your money down out of bed and ain't willing to stand up and be counted like a man or woman. It takes a man to stand and be a man. Anybody can go down to nigger town and commit adultery with a nigger, but it takes a Christian, a man, to stand for God. Let me call you farmers to attention to a few things. You raise hogs, and you know when the old hog has a gang of little pigs, she'll try to protect them. You'll know the dog, when they have a gang of pups, they'll try to protect them. And you tell me you got a gang of white children running around in your yard, and you're going to stand by and see them sold out to a bunch of niggers. God help you to wake up and try to do what God would have you do. Protect your own. Act like a decent person. And then if you don't want to do that, don't be a haphazard hypocrite. Don't be one-sided. Go on to nigger town, forget about it.
The Klan was born 100 years ago in Pulaski, Tennessee, as a 6-member social club. But 6 years later, the Klan had 500,000 members. D.W. Griffith produced and directed what has been called the first great feature-length motion picture, The Birth of a Nation, whose subject was the Ku Klux Klan. Today, this film, made 50 years ago, is still shown to Klansmen as the classic example of what other generations of Southerners did to protect white supremacy. These are some scenes from The Birth of a Nation. A chance witnessing of 2 white children under a bedsheet scaring a group of Negro children is depicted as the birth of the idea for the Klan. The idea is successful. Robed and masked, Klansmen are able to frighten the Negroes. In a fight, the Negro sought for scaring a white girl and causing her to jump from a cliff to her death, kills a white man. Captured, the killer is taken into the woods and put on trial. The Klan passes judgment. The culprit is killed, and his body deposited at the door of the lieutenant governor. In the same year The Birth of a Nation was first released, a new leader rose to head the Klan. William Joseph Simmons, one-time salesman of ladies' garters, in this rare newsreel film, leads his followers up Stone Mountain in Georgia for the first initiation ceremony of the reincarnated Klan. Simmons added something new to the Klan uniform, a stylized face mask, which he alone could wear. He also insisted the Klan operate in total secrecy. The Klan's sinister power grew as new recruits joined, some through coercion, and its clandestine activities increased. In the first 14 months after World War I, 70 Negroes were lynched, 14 burned. In 1922, Imperial Wizard Simmons could not overcome intra-Klan difficulties and was replaced by a dentist from Dallas, Dr. Hiram Evans, who inherited a depleted treasury from Simmons, as well as his title of Imperial Wizard. In 1923, Evans established headquarters in Washington to be closer to Congress, the Klan's next target. The Klan was so powerful in Oregon in 1923 that it was able to elect the president of the state Senate and the Speaker of the House. In Ohio, Klan-supported candidates became mayors of Toledo, Akron, Columbus, and other cities. At the National Democratic Convention in New York in 1924, it is estimated that at least 350 delegates were Klansmen, and they were responsible for the defeat of Governor Alfred Smith as the Democratic nominee. By 1925, the Ku Klux Klan was big business. Almost 6 million Americans now belonged to the Klan, and the organization was grossing $75 million a year. Some 40,000 Klansmen and Klanswomen crowded into Washington on August 8, 1925, to parade down Pennsylvania Avenue. To help the Klan coffers, a flag was used to catch money thrown in by spectators. In the 1920s, the Imperial Wizard of Indiana, David C. Stevenson, was indicted on charges of assault and battery, rape, mayhem, kidnapping, and murder, and found guilty. This scandal caused a sharp drop in Klan membership.
To me, as a group primarily of thugs that would use the civil rights issue to foster an organization or a clan, as they are, and will take the law into their own hands. They have become more or less their own police power. They are a police group within themselves, dedicated to defiance of law, violence. They are, as I have expressed it before, they are a hooded bunch of killers and night riders and floggers that this nation and this state has no use for whatsoever.
The strength of the Ku Klux Klan is difficult to estimate. Among its many secrets is the actual membership total. Students of Klan affairs say there are at least 30 to 50,000 active members. But there are probably as many as 1 million or more Americans who are strongly sympathetic to the aims of the Klan, and who, if pushed to a decision, would join the Klan.
Their Klan court punishments are derived as a kangaroo court, where they would not deliver someone to them unless the verdict had already been derived under a slave raid system, such as is in the due diligence of J. Sekulo's Civil War, as they engage in targeted statelessness in order to remove the security structure of the Republic in order to overthrow their government and replace it with the Confederate loyalists under their illusion of fraudulent authority, with the auxiliary powers and authorities derived by the overthrown California under the Confederate terrorist organization, at which point their systematic loyalties to the criminal campaigns generates the many cons and extortions, which as a RICO charge includes the use of fraud, such as the position of paid for certain luxuries such as connections or ability to talk with original associates, at which point their barring of the freedom of association, unless it's by a bill, allows them to charge money in order to allow people to talk to each other under reduced conditions specifically designed for humiliation and defamation. And the creation of those defamations create permanent injuries, as people are psychologically trained by social engineering to think of the person under the incorrect status in the office, for the changing of status in office is fundamental without a crime to create a punishment, and the use of those punishments without a crimes was ignored by Scalia because punishments require crimes, but these retaliations under the Confederacy are not a function of the American government, and since they are not American, they can be considered punishments or retaliations or war crimes against their target communities, which are systematically being dismantled and injured as punishments for violating Confederate custom.
Initiates swear allegiance to the Klan above all things. The secrecy and ritual of these meetings, which seem almost laughable to the outsider, have a grimly serious purpose. Because of its secrecy, the Klan can hold sway over a community. When men are initiated into Klandom in rituals such as this one, their neighbors will not know they have become Klansmen. If some of the initiates are policemen or sheriff's deputies, their fellow officers will not know. If they are jurors, their fellow jurors will not know. Under the cloak of this secrecy, the Klan can take over positions of influence and power.
I beseech you.
The criminal schemes of the Confederate insurgencies by double agents has derived the use of its compromised agents in order to engage war for the Confederacy against the Americans, at which point the double agents in the federal government, having declared war on American national security, are guilty of treason, sedition, and high crimes, and using these secrets in order to protect Klan secrets in the militia forces in a fake bloodless war in preparation of the destabilized communities by economic hitmen and other insurrectionist terrorisms, generating the fraudulent use of American government without American authority, generating the activity of Klan functions without American government. Now, them having compromised the United States government as double agents cannot legally use their office in the function of Confederate insurrections, at which point you have the implementation of their obligations to be arrested for their criminal thefts of American equipment in the pursuit of the destruction of the United States.
Auxiliary policeman, the city attorney, who is responsible for prosecuting charges against Klansmen arrested for violence against civil rights workers, was himself identified as a Klansman. The powerful Bogalusa Klan moved this year against radio station WBOX, whose owner was one of a group which invited former Arkansas Congressman Brooks Hayes to make a speech in Bogalusa on race relations. Klansmen made hundreds of anonymous phone calls to the station's sponsors. The effect was immediate. 75% of the commercials were canceled. Though the Klan says it has respect for law and order, there are records of countless crimes which some Klansmen performed for reasons they deemed proper. Judge Daniel Duke, who has fought the Klan for 25 years in Georgia, tells how the Klan administered its own kind of justice.
They'd have the Clocan committee, or the committee that administered the floggings. One would get on one side of this man who was doubled up with his wrist handcuffed to his ankles, who had been taken from his home, he thought, by a legal warrant, and who had, unknown to him, been reported by someone to be a labor organizer, and they equated that to communism, and then they equated that to race mixing, and they would usually equate that to, say, some Jewish person was back of it, and a multiplicity of things, anything that appealed to hate, prejudice. They'd take this man and they would beat him unmercifully.
The Ku Klux Klan does not stop at floggings. 8 years ago in Birmingham, Alabama, a group of Klansmen committed the most heinous crime short of murder. As a warning to civil rights leaders, they abducted this man and castrated him.
These examples of Ku Klux Klan activity are not unusual. For the past 100 years, the invisible empire, this self-proclaimed second national government, has reserved to itself police authority and the right to correct what it considers wrong. Although some Klansmen have been apprehended and tried for their crimes, the fact remains that the perpetrators of more than 225 bombings and 1,000 acts of racial violence, reprisal, and intimidation in the last 10 years have not been arrested. The problem is that law enforcement itself is often in the hands of authorities who either belong to or sympathize with the Ku Klux Klan. The publisher of the Atlanta Constitution, Ralph McGill, explains why citizens are powerless to protest in such situations.
In a small community, you too often find that the sheriff is a member, or that the deputies are members, and the poor white man, or more particularly the poor Negro in a small community, he well knows that protection at all, that the law isn't going to help him because the law is more often than not in the Klan or sympathetic with it in the small southern community.
The Klan is not a single, strongly organized group. It is composed of splinter groups fighting each other for new members and new territory. On Memorial Day weekend, Robert Shelton's chief rival, James Venable, head of the National Knights of the KKK, took his Klan north to a site 25 miles from Cincinnati, Ohio. Both Venable and Shelton believed the whites in the north worried about Negro civil rights demands in their own communities, are ready to embrace the Klan. This was the first open Klan rally in Ohio in more than 30 years. The fact that the Klan is getting bolder was demonstrated by the site which was selected, right alongside Superhighway 75. Klan robes, many of which had been stored away for years, were put out for an airing. Since the building of a cross for the Klan ritual requires skill, out-of-staters volunteered to hammer the cross pieces, wrap the burlap carefully, and then soak their handiwork with a mixture of gasoline and motor oil, a half-gallon of gasoline and 5 pounds of oil for every foot of the cross.
Giuffrida was an old, cold warrior from Reagan's California days whose specialty was suppression of unrest and dissent.
You're dealing with a group of people in the Reagan administration who equated political dissent with treason, and who cannot differentiate between emergency procedures, which I think everyone agrees are necessary, and suppressing political dissent.
For some 15 years, according to an article in Covert Action Information Bulletin written by William Preston Jr., a secret conspiratorial alliance between various American corporations and their Nazi collaborators betrayed and subverted U.S. national interests in the U.S. efforts to try to win World War II.
But CIA involvement in the drug business did not start in Central America. It dates back at least as far as the Vietnam War.
Well, the three men, Shackley and Singlaub and Secord, were all working together from different countries on the huge CIA secret war in Laos. Our allies were the opium-growing tribesmen, and this meant that we continued in a very large way not only to support but really to augment a flow of heroin. This had to be run with the knowledge and the approval of the people who were in charge of these air operations.
What do you say to someone who would challenge the right to air shocking kinds of clips like what we just saw? I guess the big question is, what are the limits? I mean, where does it stop?
A potpourri of news, special reports, and interviews, spotlighting some of the most amazing stories of this century, which have been ignored by the regular media. Also,
North and George Bush began to turn FEMA into an instrument of domestic anti-terrorism.
You're dealing with a group of people in the Reagan administration who equated political dissent with treason, and who cannot differentiate between emergency procedures, which I think everyone agrees are necessary, and suppressing political dissent. And with North and Poindexter and Casey, you had a group of people who saw Americans who disagree with them as the enemy.
Colonel North, in your work at the NSC, were you not assigned at one time to work on plans for the continuity of government in the event of a major disaster? Mr. Chairman.
I believe that question touches upon a highly sensitive and classified area, so may I request that you not touch upon that, sir.
I was particularly concerned, Mr. Chairman, because I read in Miami papers and several others that there had been a plan developed by that same agency, a contingency plan in the event of emergency that would suspend the American Constitution. And I was deeply concerned about it and wondered if that was the area in which he had worked. I believe that it was, but I wanted to get his
May I most
confirmation.
respectfully request that that matter not be touched upon at this stage. If we wish to get into this, I'm certain arrangements can be made for an executive session.
Another section of the documentary cover-up shows the details of the CIA involvement for many years with drug operations.
But CIA involvement in the drug business did not start in Central America. It dates back at least as far as the Vietnam War.
Well, the three men, Shackley and Singlaub and Secord, were all working together from different countries on the huge CIA secret war in Laos. Our allies were the opium-growing tribesmen, and this meant that we continued in a very large way not only to support but really to augment a flow of heroin. This had to be run with the knowledge and the approval of the people who were in charge of these air operations. And these air operations had been controlled in the 66-68 period by General Secord.
The way the dynamics worked is that you're a young or middle grade case officer or pilot on Air America, the CIA Airlines, or CAT, Civil Air Transport, and this general and his family or his aides get on the plane and they have suitcases that you know damn well is full of heroin. Now, you don't really have the authority to throw them off. It's kind of more their country than yours. And if you do, you're going to lose your job and have the whole weight of the CIA coming down on you. Whereas if you just smile and fly them and then get them down to the base in whatever capital you're going to and take them through customs if necessary, help them through, you're doing your job, you're making money, no questions asked.
The weapons trade and the narcotics trade in the world are two of the top 5 major money-making transactions in the whole world.
And finally, the documentary cover-up spotlights the secret team as seen by the Christic Institute.
But Daniel Sheehan, chief legal counsel for the Christic Institute, a public interest law firm, believes there are other influential players involved.
There exists in operation now a secret team of some 24 men, former Central Intelligence Agency covert operatives, former U.S. Pentagon arms suppliers, who have joined together in a private enterprise outside of the control of the American government, either the Congress or the President, who are mounting their personal wars around the world.
Whether there is actual...
Coming up next, cable television and the First Amendment.
How far can programming actually go?
You've probably witnessed a scene like the one you're about to see, either at the movies or on television, but with one major difference. The narrator of this piece, which aired on cable television, tells us the scene is for real, one of the deadly encounters between the Ku Klux Klan and civil rights demonstrators in North Carolina. Then there is this interview, which was taped and aired by the public access cable television here in Austin. John Stockwell, the person speaking, is a former CIA agent.
Once again, our leaders are flatly lying about the truth. If the Contras are freedom fighters, I'm an Egyptian belly dancer. They're the most bloodthirsty, cruelest terrorists that the CIA has perhaps ever dealt with. Going into villages, hauling out the father, the family is asleep, hauling out the father and forcing the family to watch while he's alive, while you castrate him, and stick him full of holes, and then stick a grenade in his mouth and pull the pin.
Pretty strong stuff. Does he have a right to say this? Yes, under our Constitution's First Amendment, which guarantees all of us the right of free speech. Does a television channel have the right to air controversial or shocking segments like the ones you just saw? When I was first looking at both of these segments, it is shocking. It's hard to believe that we're actually watching people get shot, possibly killed right there on television. What do you say to someone who would challenge the right to air shocking kinds of clips like what we just saw? One of them is very verbally shocking, and the other one is literally, physically, we're seeing people die.
So the best short answer I can give you is that what the First Amendment is about is not people's right to say things you agree with or that you like or are pleasing to you, but rather to say things you disagree with, and that's the real test. That doesn't mean that there aren't limits, especially with regard to obscenity and libel and so forth.
The question is, what are the limits? I mean, where does it stop? I know that there's some other programs that air on ACTV, the Ku Klux Klan, Paul, some of the shows where they're able to just speak out and say what they feel, and then there's been some other programs that people have periodically protested about. Where are the limits? And I guess what I would say, what would somebody come and show you that you would say, I think you need, an attorney's advice, and I think you need not to show that?
Well, I don't know if looking at it as to what are the limits is the proper focus. I think the First Amendment and the Constitution pretty much allow free reign in the presentation of ideas. I think the good thing about cable TV and about access TV is that it really gives a vitality to the First Amendment.
What it does is gives the opportunity for the community to introduce ideas. It's an electronic marketplace of ideas, as it were. And it lets people bring these ideas to the public forum that you wouldn't get on commercial TV for a long period of time. Frank Morrow's program, as controversial as it is, introduces ideas into political thought and into the community that takes a year for CBS or NBC to catch up with. So I think the really magnificent thing about the First Amendment and cable TV is this dimension that it gives to the electronic marketplace. Like these programs that you all have here, that's really what we're talking about. Too many times I think we look at it negatively, the government can't do this and can't do that. We all know that by now, that we have rights. But there's an affirmative way of using that right to make us better citizens and better movers and shakers in the society.
Republicans and the people who support them keep saying that there is so much prosperity in the United States when other reports say, hey, this isn't true. There's a Hunger Reaches Blue Collar America, a report, that's the name of it, released by the Physician Task Force of Hunger in America, which is a public health advocacy group. And they talk about how hunger and poverty are increasing and have been increasing in the United States, particularly during the 80s, during the Reagan years. They say that 32.4 million people live below the poverty level, which is 9,000, a little shade over 9,000 for a family of three. And many of them have to rely on food banks and soup kitchens. And this means that they regularly miss meals or cut down on food or even go without food for a couple of days. But now it's hitting blue-collar people, whereas before it was not necessarily blue-collar, and is also hitting a bankrupt farm people. But even the farm families are not being able to get help from the government because the regulations, for instance, if the farmer has farm machinery, well, that disqualifies him for help. He's got to discard or sell or get rid of his farm machinery before the government will help him all. Well, the U.S. poverty rate is higher now than at any time from 1969 to 1980, according to the U.S. Census Bureau. By the way, this information comes from the Food Monitor, which is a publication of the World Hunger Year. They say that even the greater proportion of Americans, 1/4 of all American people, live in poverty and have lived in poverty sometime during the year. The number of poor in the nation was 24.5 million in 1978. Today it's 32.4 million. 40% of the people in poverty even have incomes that are less than half of the poverty line. And if you remember how the poverty line was set up during the Great Society days, Lyndon Johnson wanted to set up a program to help poor people, so they said, okay, let's determine what is poverty. So they had the Red Cross come up with various different amounts of money for a family of four. And the poverty line, really, which the Red Cross said was much too high for the bureaucrats. But they did have another amount of money, which was $3,300 a year. And that was supposed to be for people only for a very short period of time, for emergency purposes only, because it would result in severe malnutrition for the people. So this is what the politicians said would be the poverty line. And then they found that 3,200 was an embarrassment because in Lyndon Johnson state, Texas, and in so many southern states, they found that too many people were below that. So they lowered that to $3,000 a year, and that is the poverty line. So when they say poverty line, don't believe it's just poverty. That's severe deprivation. But anyway, this is what Reaganomics and Reaganism has given us, not only because of the bad economic conditions, but because of the downward pressure on wages in the economy, the union busting that's been going on, and about all people can get. The working poor are now making very little money, and also it's a breaking up of the families. The wife is having to work as well. So you can snort or harumph or just grit your teeth when some of these people tell you, oh, wow, we've had good times in the United States. We've got a lot of prosperity here.
Well, we've run out of time. We appreciate you joining us on Alternative Views again. Alternative Views is a presentation of the Alternative Information Network. P.O. Box 7279, Austin, Texas 78713.
They are actively seeking to destroy Medicare and Medicaid as a continuation of these systems which are viewed as necessary in David's absence. The character David Bowles, from the position of economic national security, having acquired the advantages of the aristocracy as the pro-American autocracy, the aristocracy, from their projections, has historically been used in order to destroy the United States. But David, being pro-American, through the systems that they would use, is stronger and more competent in the functions, which means the insurgents would systematically be dismantled. Now, the oligarchies, which is a subordinate aspect of the aristocracy, would mutually be subordinate to David Bowles' character, at which point you have these systems which are actively engaged in the hedging against the larger productions inside the United States for the wizard communism, generating their ability to craft their preferred fascist economy mixed with communism, which generates the acts of war by alternative means to direct hot war tactics, which would have been the alternative if the Americans had been competent and protected David's title, at which point it would have been a second civil war in a hot war fashion, generated by the systematic stages, depending upon when they felt they wanted to engage in said hot war. At which point it would be entirely on the basis of Lindsey Graham's character's group to plan the initiation of their war crimes in public against the American population.